The United States is experiencing profound financial, political, and geopolitical shifts that are reshaping the nation's economic landscape. Three major forces: unprecedented debt creation and money printing, increasing internal conflict, and a rising global power in China, are driving these changes. These forces, while distinct, are interconnected and contribute to the uncertainty and instability that define the current era. Understanding the historical context of these trends, their economic implications, and the future trajectory of the U.S. financial state is essential for navigating the complexities of the present. The U.S. has for many years engaged in aggressive fiscal policies, characterized by significant debt creation and the printing of money to finance that debt. This has been a central aspect of U.S. economic management, particularly during periods of crisis, such as the 2008 financial meltdown and the COVID-19 pandemic. The Federal Reserve, in conjunction with the U.S. Treasury, has utilized monetary policies like quantitative easing, QE, to stimulate the economy, ensuring liquidity in the financial markets by purchasing government bonds and other securities. While these policies are intended to stabilize the economy during downturns, they have long-term consequences that are becoming increasingly evident. The result of these policies is a dramatic increase in the U.S. national debt, which currently exceeds $33 trillion and continues to grow. Much of this debt is held by foreign investors, with significant portions owned by countries like China and Japan. Domestically, the Federal Reserve itself holds a substantial portion of U.S. debt, further entangling the central bank in the nation's fiscal policy. This heavy reliance on debt financing raises critical concerns about the sustainability of U.S. economic growth and the stability of its financial system. At the core of the issue is the monetization of debt, where central banks print money to purchase government bonds. This process increases the money supply and injects liquidity into the economy, but it also leads to inflationary pressures. Inflation erodes the value of money over time, reducing purchasing power and disproportionately affecting lower and middle-income households. While inflation has been relatively low for decades, it surged in recent years, particularly following the COVID-19 pandemic, which disrupted supply chains, led to labor shortages, and caused a massive fiscal response. The inflationary environment presents a significant challenge for the Federal Reserve, which must balance its dual mandate of promoting maximum employment and maintaining price stability. Raising interest rates to combat inflation could slow economic growth and potentially lead to a recession, while keeping rates low may further fuel inflation. This dilemma highlights the precarious nature of the current financial state in the U.S., where the interplay between monetary policy and inflation is fraught with risk. To understand the present financial challenges, it is crucial to look at historical precedents. One of the most relevant periods for comparison is the 1970s, a decade marked by high inflation, slow economic growth, and rising unemployment, known as stagflation. During this time, the U.S. faced significant economic turmoil, exacerbated by the oil shocks of 1973 and 1979, which drove up energy prices and contributed to inflationary pressures. The Federal Reserve, under the leadership of Paul Volcker, ultimately took aggressive action to curb inflation by raising interest rates to unprecedented levels in the early 1980s. While this strategy succeeded in bringing inflation under control, it also led to a sharp recession and significant economic pain. The lessons of the 1970s and early 1980s are instructive for understanding the current financial environment. Just as in that period, the U.S. economy today is grappling with inflationary pressures and a challenging economic landscape. However, there are key differences. The global economy is far more interconnected, and the U.S. financial system is deeply embedded in a globalized world where supply chains, trade, and capital flows are more integrated than ever before. This adds complexity to the challenge of managing inflation and stabilizing the economy. Moreover, the U.S. dollar's role as the world's reserve currency complicates the situation. The dollar's dominance in global trade and finance means that U.S. monetary policy has ripple effects throughout the world. This status allows the U.S. to borrow at relatively low interest rates and sustain higher levels of debt than most other countries. However, it also means that any erosion of confidence in the dollar could have catastrophic consequences for the U.S. economy and global financial stability. In addition to financial challenges, the U.S. is experiencing increasing internal conflict, particularly along political, cultural, and socio-economic lines. The polarization between different segments of American society has reached levels not seen since the early 20th century. Political divisions, wealth inequality, and cultural rifts have all contributed to a growing sense of instability and discord. One of the most visible manifestations of this internal conflict is the deepening divide between political ideologies. The U.S. is witnessing the rise of populism on both the left and right, with each side advocating radically different visions for the future of the country. These ideological differences have become so entrenched that they threaten the functioning of the political system itself. The inability to achieve bipartisan consensus on critical issues, such as healthcare, immigration, and fiscal policy, has led to gridlock in Congress and undermined public trust in government institutions. The growing wealth gap is another source of internal conflict. Income inequality in the U.S. has been rising for decades, with the richest 1% of Americans controlling a disproportionately large share of the nation's wealth. This inequality has been exacerbated by the financialization of the economy, where financial markets and institutions have become increasingly dominant in shaping economic outcomes. The shift toward a service-based economy and the decline of manufacturing have left many workers behind, particularly in rural areas and industrial regions. The result is a growing sense of disenfranchisement among large segments of the population who feel left out of the economic prosperity enjoyed by the wealthy elite. This wealth gap has also contributed to political polarization, as different groups in society develop vastly different views on economic and social policy. For example, wealthier Americans may favor lower taxes and reduced government spending, while those who are struggling economically may support more robust social safety nets and government intervention in the economy. These differences are not merely academic. They have real-world consequences for the political stability of the country. One of the most concerning aspects of this internal conflict is the increasing willingness of people to question the legitimacy of democratic institutions. The 2020 presidential election, for example, saw widespread allegations of fraud and efforts to overturn the results, culminating in the January 6, 2021, attack on the U.S. Capitol. This event was a stark reminder of the fragility of democratic governance and the potential for political violence in the face of deep-seated divisions. As these internal conflicts intensify, they also have economic implications. Political instability can undermine investor confidence, leading to capital flight, reduced investment, and slower economic growth. Moreover, the inability of the government to address pressing issues like healthcare, education, and infrastructure investment could further erode the foundations of the U.S. economy in the long term. On the global stage, the U.S. faces another significant challenge: the rise of China as a competing superpower. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has been the dominant global power, both militarily and economically. The U.S. dollar has served as the world's reserve currency, and American institutions' values and norms have shaped the international order. However, this dominance is now being challenged by China, which has emerged as a formidable economic and geopolitical rival. China's rapid economic growth over the past few decades has transformed it into the world's second-largest economy, and its influence is expanding across the globe. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China is investing in infrastructure projects in developing countries, increasing its economic influence and fostering strategic partnerships. This has raised concerns among U.S. policymakers, who view China's rise as a threat to the established global order. The competition between the U.S. and China extends beyond economics. It encompasses technology, military power, and global governance. China is investing heavily in cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence, AI, 5G telecommunications, and quantum computing, seeking to surpass the U.S. in these critical areas. The race for technological supremacy has significant implications for the future of global power, as technological advancements can drive economic growth, military capabilities, and geopolitical influence. Militarily, China has been modernizing its armed forces and expanding its presence in key strategic areas, particularly in the South China Sea. This region is a critical global shipping route, and China's efforts to assert control over it have raised tensions with neighboring countries and the U.S., which has a vested interest in maintaining freedom of navigation in international waters. The possibility of conflict between the U.S. and China, particularly over Taiwan, adds to the geopolitical uncertainty that hangs over the global economy. The rise of China is also challenging the U.S.-led international order in terms of global governance. Institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, WTO, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, have been dominated by the U.S. and its allies for decades. However, China is increasingly seeking to reshape these institutions or create alternative ones, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, to reflect its growing power and influence. This shift is creating a more multipolar world, where the U.S. can no longer unilaterally dictate the rules of the global system. The U.S.-China rivalry is not only a geopolitical competition but also an economic one. The two countries are deeply intertwined economically, with China being the largest holder of U.S. debt and a key trading partner. However, this interdependence is also a source of vulnerability, as trade disputes, tariffs, and other economic tensions can have far-reaching consequences for both countries and the global economy. The U.S. is increasingly seeking to decouple its economy from China, particularly in critical industries like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. But this process is fraught with challenges and could lead to disruptions in global supply chains. Given these challenges, rising debt, internal conflict, and geopolitical competition, the future of the U.S. financial state is uncertain. Several scenarios could unfold, depending on how policymakers and institutions respond to these pressures. One possibility is a continued reliance on debt financing and money printing to sustain economic growth. However, this path is fraught with risks, as it could lead to runaway inflation, currency devaluation, and a loss of confidence in the U.S. dollar. If inflation continues to rise, the Federal Reserve may be forced to raise interest rates more aggressively, potentially triggering a recession or financial crisis. Another scenario is that the U.S. government takes steps to address its fiscal imbalances by reducing spending, raising taxes, or both. While this approach could help stabilize the debt situation, it would likely be politically contentious, as it would require difficult choices and sacrifices. Moreover, austerity measures could slow economic growth and exacerbate social inequalities, further fueling internal conflict. In the geopolitical arena, the U.S. may seek to strengthen alliances with other democratic nations to counterbalance China's rise. This could involve greater cooperation on trade, technology, and security, as well as efforts to reform global governance institutions to better reflect the interests of democratic nations. However, this approach would require significant diplomatic effort and coordination, and there is no guarantee that it would succeed in containing China's influence. Ultimately, the future of the U.S. financial state will depend on the ability of policymakers to navigate these complex challenges and make difficult decisions. The stakes are high, not only for the U.S., but for the global economy as a whole. In a world of increasing uncertainty and instability, the choices made today will shape the financial landscape for years to come.